As I promised, I will add a little to the recent film about Russian disinformation. And today, there will be a series more to think about. An unusual summary of facts about thinking. In recent years, I have been actively studying such a phenomenon as anticultism. I consider it from different sides. I study its destructive influence on society. And what I will talk about today is rather hypothetical in nature, personal observations and conclusions. But from this, I think, they are no less valuable, because this is how the essence is perceived. And I'll start with this, with the concept of religious diversity, pluralism. In the film, The Agent of the Russian Federation in Ukraine, I remind you, it was released last summer. In 2025, I have already touched on this topic. I will return to it again, because I think it is important and can explain a lot. So, big wars do not start by chance. They are being prepared. I think many people understand this. But how do they prepare? With what technology? What stages of propaganda does the civil society go through? Before attacking someone, here historians should shout louder to be heard. After all, they probably noticed a lot this time too. Well, alas, alas. Anti-cultism is not an accidental phenomenon in the historical context. As you will understand a little later, it is quite an effective tool, as it turned out in the preparation for the Great Invasion. I really hope that someday the high minds will understand this. I don't have it, and those who will write historical works there, or put forward the first accusations of crimes against humanity, it would be very appropriate to study the issue of anti-cultism, in my opinion. Because when it comes to serious shocks, deaths, mass deaths of people, genocide, wars, it is always necessary to consider deeper causal links. Let's first fix the definition. Religious diversity is a concept that recognizes that various religious traditions can coexist peacefully in one society. Do not tolerate each other. Do not compete. Do not fight. Namely, coexist on equal terms. What is anti-cultism? If you look at it from this point of view, this is a technology for the extermination of religious pluralism, for the destruction of this equality. After all, notice, anti-cultism is not a dispute, because they do not argue, they suppress. This is not a polemic. They do not enter into any discussion at all. This is their direct rule. A tough rule, by the way, and Dvorkin talked about it. And even more so, this is not some kind of theological discussion, because anti-cultists, in their absolute majority, people who are not academic, on the contrary, they oppose each other in science and religion. I generally believe that these are mostly crooks who have the ability and incredible pressure to fool a huge mass of the population. You are simply amazed at the scale. And it turns out that from this point of view, anti-cultism is a technology for the extermination of religious pluralism. And to expand our understanding a little more, we will need memory today, a rare thing today. It is because of its lack, unfortunately, that society again and again attacks the same robberies. So let's remember the events of 100 years ago, Germany in the 1930s. Walter Kühnert, then his Apologetic Center. They talked a lot about him. We continue to talk. Let's go back again. They also led an anti-cult campaign then, against Jehovah's Witnesses, Jews, unpleasant Christians, and so on. Fortunately, there are documents of that time which we can read today. This story is described in detail, by the way, in the documentary film, The Impact. Actually, that's where we found out about it. Who has not seen it yet, I highly recommend it. Analytics is a useful thing. It develops critical thinking in a person. But let's go back to Germany. Among other things, here you can add a lot of things. The goal of the anti-cultist German campaign could also be to erase religious pluralism. After all, they needed to unite the nation around the ideology of their Führer, around the radical ideas, the mad ideas of Hitler. In fact, today we understand perfectly well that this was the most powerful influence on the consciousness of the masses. Why did this fanaticism pour out? History remembers well. They were not stupid people, it seems. But what did they come to? to the ideas of choice, superiority, Aryan blood, to the ideas of total physical extermination of thoughtful people, world domination, the result of the Second World War, and tens of millions of victims. The question hangs in the air. If it were not for the anti-cultist campaign of Cunard, the Nazis could have united the German people around the mad ideas of Adolf Hitler and his superiors. Yes, there was the most powerful propaganda machine of Goebbels, but still, and there was also an anti-cultist campaign, the lists were transferred to the Gestapo. And now, reflection. When different faiths and different beliefs are recognized as equal and calmly live together, it is almost impossible to separate them. Well, how? A quarter of Christians, a quarter of Muslims, a quarter of Buddhists, and a quarter of small religious groups. Everyone believes in something, freely. What's the difference? How to call God? He is still one. Religious pluralism teaches a person to see in others a neighbor, not an enemy. It does not allow the myth about the God-chosen people, about exclusiveness, about the genius of superiority. It does not allow to live in the head of this infection, that only God is with us. God is with us. And without this myth about God-chosenness, it is difficult to start a big war, because there is nothing to ignite people with, nothing to relieve by pushing to death. Isn't that so? Based on this, we can come to the conclusion that regimes that prepare aggression, first of all, kill by religious pluralism. This can be considered as a necessary stage of preparation. And it is done by the hands of whom? It is done by the hands of the anti-Kurds. Look at Russia of the 1990s. Under the slogan of the struggle with a totalitarian sex, Vladimir Dvorkin and his center, Irina Leonskogo, Bojara Sears, began their sacred struggle. And for decades, they denied to all non-Orthodox the right to exist. They were called an infection, a cancer, a mafia, a threat to the state, agents of enemy special services, extremists, terrorists, Satanists, even cannibals. If we remember Rwanda, there, before the genocide, people were called cockroaches. Is there a difference? And this anti-cultural strike, as it seems to me, was carried out not so much by the communities, but by the very thought that all faiths have the right to life. People were taught that there can be only one true faith, and the rest is heresy, that is, the enemy and Satan, enemy intelligence. Something similar probably happened in Germany in the 1930s. And now let's run through the similarities. Another similarity. Kunat worked with the Gestapo and Dvorkin with the FSB. Another similarity. And there were blacklists of dangerous religions and unpleasant organizations. And finally, another similarity. These countries started the first invasion war. What do you think? Is it all a coincidence? Or is it technology that has been around for centuries? We have not yet. It would be interesting if they conducted research on this issue. And here's another thing. The map is in time. It turns out that in Russia, the number of sectarian issues is very impressive. We ourselves were surprised. And not all of them. What happened to these people, I wonder? It depends on which bell tower to look at. Let's see. Let's look at different ones. All who are not in the line of the Russian Orthodox Church are sectarians. They are convinced. Only their faith is right, true, leading to God. Because God is with them, the rest are very confused. Okay, let's look at another one. Can religion justify and call for a murder like this? Light up the weapons? There are many things that can be pulled up. Introduce mandatory prayers for victory. What kind of God leads them? After all, they are not disturbed by the fact that their compatriots officially go to kill their neighbor for money. For money to kill other people. I'm not talking about climate, crime, drug addiction, economy, corruption, and so on. Sex. And there is another funny thing. They don't even know the total number of sectarians in their country. You read these statements and you don't know how to comment on them. In 2001, anti-cultist Steniev reported in the Radonezh newspaper that there are about 5 million victims of sectarianism, that is, 3.5%. In 2003, on some round table, the number of 1 million sectarians was mentioned. In 2006, Dvorkin and Semyonov, who are members of the Russian Orthodox Church, called the number from 600 to 800,000 people on the official website of the Russian Orthodox Church. In 2013, a certain O.S. Dolgan called the number, according to the data, close to the official, about 1.5 million victims of sectarianism. A certain lawyer Trunov called the number from 3 to 5 million people. In 2025, the National News Service called the number 1.5 million sectarians. The anti-cultist Igor Ivanishko participated in the press conference. Finally, in 2025, anti-cultist Mikhail Vershinin called the number 1.5 million sectarians. Balalaika, not statistics, with one word. Who are they fighting? With windmills? And then what are the merits of the shit? In 20 years, the number of sectarians has only grown. Or maybe their number never had a special meaning, because anti-cultism from the very beginning was aimed at something else. I think he had a completely different goal: create conditions, launch a punitive mechanism, and destroy religious diversity, to make it easier to start a war. Maybe so. What do you think? To make it easier to unite the nation around the political and religious top. Maybe that's the whole point? In any case, the parallel with Nazi Germany is a note for historians. And you know what conclusion comes from all this? That religious diversity, in my opinion, is an immune system of society and an effective protection from war. It is no coincidence that any regime preparing for aggression begins with suppression of the inner diversity. And the first target almost always becomes faith. Do you know a person for whom it is normal that the neighbor prays in a different way? It is much more difficult to convince that a stranger abroad is worthy of death, because the equality of religion is an excellent cure for hatred. And anti-cultism in this case, in this context, turns out to be essentially a mechanism for preparing society for a great war. Except for everything else, I come to this conclusion today: if we had a good memory and critical thinking, we would remember and understand a lot. Oh, we would respect each other. Who would not want to live in such a society?